Alright then. So hello everyone. It's a long time coming, I kind of figure. I knew this was going to be an eventual reality. Basically in short, the D&D game is dead in the water. We've taken too long to get back to it, and a lot of the players are burnt out on the whole waiting game. So, in essence, what I'm doing here is I'm giving at least my version of the end cap of what was going to happen as long as things continue to proceed as hopefully planned, but there could have been changes depending on what went down. So basically from where we left off, they were going to head to the next capital of the next coastline country. This is where some development for Osio was going to come out. It was going to be figured out pretty quickly that her name was a combination of both her parents' first names, and that there's actually a huge amount of stuff waiting for her because they were actually merchants before they became freebooters, mostly for the thrill of it, but also because it also was another revenue of making money that wasn't nearly as cutthroat as being a normal merchant, although it still had its own dangers. After the accidental passing of her parents, the freebooters would basically kept her on because they didn't know where to really send her and didn't trust that maybe they would get jacked up for being the possible cause of her parents' death, because they were also merchants, so it made them nervous, so they just hid the fact and kept her on as a growing crew member. While this is all happening, this is also where the gathering was going to be at this capital, and this is also where they would finally have their first encounter with King Conan. He was going to be amongst the other leaders who were going to lead a charge against the Raiders of the Eclipse, the pirate group that they've been dealing with, and they were going to head off to the islands to start attacking the Raiders who had invaded the pirate den there, as well as digging into the other things they shouldn't be. That's also where some of the other story elements start to quickly tie together at this point. Once the plan was that once they managed to fight their way past at least the main brigade of Eclipse pirate ships, they were going to make landfall, find their hidden base, which at that particular angle isn't very well hidden because they had help trying to find it, and once they got to the inner workings, they were going to find the leader, who was essentially a NPC warlock who sold his soul to an elder god for the power that he had, which would then tie finally back to the relic that Belarius brought in. That's how Belarius was actually a nice tie-in for my story, is because I was trying to figure out how all of this was going to tie together, and her having an artifact that the Raiders were looking for would be the key to getting this all tied together. Long story short, they were looking for the artifact for somebody else. That somebody else being Thulsa Doom. Thulsa Doom was going to basically be my main big overarching villain. He was originally a Cull villain. The comic books also add him to Conan's roster, and I figured this would be a good, solid way to possibly end Thulsa Doom, as we knew him, at least, in a more proper and more final, real final manner, because for those who don't know, Thulsa Doom is more or less a proto-lich. He has multiple ways of surviving, even though he may look to be destroyed finally, there's also obviously going to be another way he could come back, unless you do something very, very final to completely destroy him or permanently imprison him somewhere. So the plan was that upon the leader Warlock's death, we'd have another visage of Thulsa Doom, and this time being also closer physically to where the main cast are at the moment than compared to where they were at originally. He would be able to use enough magic to also also physically the item he was looking for was now literally in the room where he was observing, and he could reach forth through the magic visage and actually snap up the item for himself, which was what he was hoping to do eventually anyways, but his people kept failing him. in his annoyance at this crew constantly foiling most of his plans up to this point, and obviously showing themselves to still be the threat he already perceived, he was going to tell them, you want to know everything? You want to know what all those machinations have been? You want to know what all this weird background stuff has been and how you're all tied to it? Fine, come find me. And he would give his location, which was supposed to be essentially Mount Crom. I believe there is supposed to be a mountain where Crom is supposed to be like constantly watching over Samaria. I forget where that is. I just happen to know that there's a thing for that. But that could be something I just misread from somewhere else. I'm not entirely sure. But that was going to be the basic gist of it, is that he was in one of the mountains in Samaria. They would travel back with King Conan essentially for a while and be given his blessing to go north and try and find out what this all is, and maybe even given a bit of a gear upgrade for those that didn't have it to try and help them in their attempts to finally rid the Hyborian Age of Thulsa Doom, because Thulsa Doom has been a constant problem for King Conan as well in the past. So they would then head up to Samaria and start to do their battle. I was planning that by the time they get there, obviously Thulsa Doom had gotten away with most of what his plan was. Essentially, he's going to be using the relic as a way to form a gateway. And so... sorry. So with that in mind, Thulsa Doom was going to have multiple gateways already opened, and through the multiple gateways you'd see different limbs, if you will, of the final Elder God, as he was going to try and reach forward and try and both attack allies, but also Thulsa Doom himself being more or less a lich, would have also had a small plethora of undead beings already at his beck and call, waiting to guard him. So, depending on how combat went, the basic plan was that they would likely be able to get themselves through the undead pretty quickly, but they would come up to Thulsa Doom, and who would be constantly knocked head over heels in combat, but they would find him to be quite impervious to actually freaking dying. They would constantly down him, or at least so it would seem, but everything would he would keep coming back up. Also, one of the plans I had is that depending on how much damage had been done to him, a certain number of the portals would be closed because he's lacking his focus on keeping the portals open with the artifact. And at this point, if they still didn't know what to do, I would give them the chance, with the last portal open still, and permanently open because he just won't die, that they could do a perception check and try and figure out the idea. The idea would be to literally and physically force him and the artifact through the portal to the other side. With the artifact on the other side, it would just become one with the Eldritch deity and no longer physically allow the portals to be open, but also would trap Thulsa Doom there with the creature he had so fervently tried to make bargains with, and even allowed others to have blessings of power through the said bargains. So there would finally be a proper bookend for Thulsa Doom as a character, just finally physically sending him off somewhere else where he would very likely be gone, at the very least, for an extremely long time. It would bookend a lot of the attachments some of the characters had, including Belarius, who was the most recent addition to the crew, over there by underneath Mystic Tales. As for the answers for everyone else, the reason, I keep forgetting some of the names, I don't have the character sheets in front of me, but the reason why my Barbarian was attacked was because Thulsa Doom essentially paid off a group to figure out where his people's camp was and would have them attacked in hopes that he'd be one of the ones that died. The reason why Giselle, I probably remember her name now, Giselle was attacked or was constantly put down as just a common thief was because he paid the higher-ups off to not hire her and not let her in on things, even though she would still find her own way through, and eventually found the rest of the crew. The reason Theobald's people died in his magic wouldn't work is because he had given trinkets to the other army that would essentially disallow certain deities to be able to enact anything, which is why he had to make a very sudden and very rash change to another deity in order to save his people, which then caused him to be kicked out. And the reason why the White Witch was doing the stuff that she was doing, Thoughts of Doom. The reason why the Eclipse even existed, Thoughts of Doom. And it could also be very heavily hinted that due to Thoughts of Doom, a lot of the things that Thelona went through would also be because of him. So basically everything was his fault, and a whole lot of them would be able to get a lot of revenge. My perceived idea as to what could likely befall the characters at the end, most likely Theobald and Thelona would go off alone, possibly venturing for a while, most likely trying to outdo some of the guys that Thelona still had a grudge with. If things kind of mellowed out between them, I could see I can't remember Zerv's character's name right now. Again, I don't have them right in front of me. But I could see her and Geralt possibly finally settling down and basically kind of pulling Conan's dad bit where they could settle into the Borderlands, south of Samaria, and possibly live out a peaceful life there, depending. It'd be at least the way he would prefer it. I know that for certain. Giselle would not mind to stick around with Azina, and I believe, I can't remember now, I keep mixing up the two countries over there on the border, on the western sea border. I believe where Azina comes from, they're pretty kind of free about open marriages kind of deals, so the two of them could still have like their hookups, but they'd still be mostly in the relationship between the two of them. And Valeria's, I'm not entirely sure. She doesn't have any particular hookups with any of the main characters, but I could also possibly see her and Geralt maybe kicking it off if everything with the Necromancer didn't work. But that's just a theory. Again, depending upon how things headed off by the end. And that's the general idea of where things would go. If nothing else, she could have earned very quickly a position of High Priestess in Aqualonia after everything she had managed to survive and get through it, and also being one of the small amount of crew that single-handedly outdid Thulsa Doom finally, at least for the rest of their mortal lives in this plane. So that at least would be a given for her. And that's basically my final thoughts on what my plans were for this run of the game. So, like I said before, I was kind of seeing this was going to happen eventually anyways. And apparently last game, people were really hard to focus up, so I understand that it's definitely a decision that finally we should just call it. Just wave the flag. As much as we want to continue the game, people are so burnt out on trying to keep up the schedule that it's just not going to happen anymore. Maybe if we can figure out another schedule and figure out some shorter games, we could possibly be back to some D&D. Otherwise, for foreseeable future, I assume we're going to be going back to video games, especially on Saturday whenever we have the opportunity to. So that's going to be it for now. Hope you all enjoy. See you all in the next D&D campaign. And that's it for now. See you next time.